So, Esther is about to go into the king's presence unannounced and faces possible death for daring to do so. And many of us will know how the story continues with all of its twists and turns, so that's a bit of a giveaway. And I do encourage those who aren't so familiar with it to read on. It's short and it's a real page turner. And we'll only get extracts read of it in the next 2 weeks. So if you want the unabridged version, it's right here in your Bibles. Let's remind ourselves of where we've got to in the story so far. And I'd then like to reflect on some of the things we can learn from today's passage. In particular, how we can reflect on how a whole group of people can respond to a really bad situation by crying out to God and working out what seems to be the best thing to do. We'll then be able to draw some encouraging things for us to do as we face together or individually when we are in times like these. Some sharp-eared ones of you may have already noticed that I brought God into a story that famously has no mention of him. But he is visible, but only as we look behind the scenes. So the story starts in Susa, the capital of the Persian kingdom, some hundreds of years before Jesus' time. And many of the Jews were taken into exile when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, destroying Solomon's temple, and all this was in the 6th century BC. The Persians then conquered Babylon, and some Jews who had not returned from exile by then were taken to Susa in Persia. That's in Iran. And Esther, an orphan of her uncle Mordecai, and her uncle Mordecai were two of the many Jews who were still living there. And as we heard last week from Sarah, the king, Xerxes, is portrayed as a drunken, easily manipulated ruler who dethroned his wife, Queen Vashti, because she refused to parade herself in front of his drunken party friends. And in what these days can only really be described as grooming and sex enslavement, Esther, a young and attractive woman, is taken into the palace harem, finds favor with the king, and in short order becomes the new queen. She hides her Jewish identity. And meanwhile, her uncle Mordecai, probably a senior civil servant, uncovers a plot to dispatch the king, and he foils it, but he's not rewarded yet. And in chapter 3, also worth reading, the villain of the piece is introduced, Haman. He's not Persian, and he's not Jewish, but he is an Agagite, descended from the Amalekites, old enemies of the Jews. And he's a civil servant who gets promoted to be the top man and arranges for everyone else to bow down whenever he passes by. So Mordecai, the Jew, refuses to do this, and infuriated, Haman discovers he's a Jew and decides not to discipline just Mordecai, but with spin and false reports persuades the king to set a date for destroying all of the Jews in his kingdom. And this date is chosen by dice throw, and it's in 11 months' time. And appallingly, that happens to be the day before the Jews' great feast of the Passover. And that's just like saying, we'll execute you all on Christmas Eve. It's desperate news. It's one thing to be surprised by an invading army, and quite another thing to be given the date when your entire ethnic group is to be slaughtered by law. So in today's reading, Mordecai is stunned, and the city has been thrown into confusion and bewilderment. They were to be set against one another, friends, colleagues, customers. The Jews were well integrated into the society. And unsurprisingly, the Jewish population react to this incredibly bleak news by fasting, weeping, lamenting, changing their normal clothes for rags, for sacks, and plastering fireplace ash into their hair. And Mordecai also does this and gets as near as he is able to the palace where Esther is. So Esther's shut away in the palace and finds out about Mordecai from her maids, as we heard, and is understandably upset. And her first instinct, not knowing the full picture, is to sort out Mordecai's clothes. But when he refuses to change into the new clothes she has sent, she sends a fixer, Hatak, to get the full story. And he comes back with this message: you've got to go and talk to the king. But you can't just go to the king. It's disobedience. You must be called. Esther will have known what had happened to her predecessor, Queen Vashti, when she disobeyed the king. And in the dramatic exchange that follows, it's Esther, I can't, he'll kill me. And Mordecai saying, well, you'll die anyway. You'll be found out you're a Jew. And anyway, someone else might come along to help, but don't think you'll be spared. You won't. And who knows? Maybe you're there as queen for such a time as this. This was quite some pressure, but you can see that Esther turns into this resolute hero and commander. She says, right, I want all the Jews in Susa to fast for me. Sort it. I and my maids will do it too. 3 days, no food, no drink. Then I'll go and see the king. Live or die. And there we leave the story, to be continued. These days, the book of Esther is publicly read out in Jewish communities on the feast day of Purim, commemorating the story and how it ends. And Purim is also the word for Lot, which is what the date was decided by. And there is lots of audience participation, like a pantomime. There are boos whenever Haman appears in the story. And at this point, with Esther, there might be shouts of, go on, girl, you've got it. It's quite dramatic stuff. So, let's reflect on some of the things we can learn from the passage in the book so far. As we've seen, God is not mentioned in the story at all, but his people are. And it's a story of the uncertain and demanding and dangerous life and the times that they live in. Rulers with their own agenda, old enemies settling scores, despising other people groups, threats of genocide. And their response is to cry out to God. This is implicit in the fasting, wailing, and lamenting. And then there is the search for who do we have to help us? Who is in a position to aid us in time like this? Fasting and prayer like this certainly concentrates the mind on what's really important. The importance of seeing the reality of God, our Creator, lover, and helper, and how he has acted in the past, and how he fulfills his promises and purposes. And yet he does it in a way that can be really quite hidden from us. This book of Esther just leaves us to wonder at how God moves in the background of this story, and sometimes in our lives as well. In fasting and in prayer for urgent, pressing needs, and as a community together, we can be particularly close together and close to God. It's a way of saying to ourselves and to God that we really mean business, and that we want that business, our business, to become aligned with his business. It's a time when we can communally lay down our preferences and seek what he prefers, to seek his will. And a good guide to what his will is what he has already revealed in the scriptures. For instance, in this passage in Micah, love for the other, love for doing justice, love for mercy and walking in humility with God, as Micah so memorably says. I can remember a few years back when Mike called for the church to fast and pray on a particular Sunday for the future of the community here, to fast and pray for our future direction. And I think we're still reaping the great rewards of that time. Just look at the blessing of open house, open to our community, open to those in need, open for quiet and prayer as one example that came out of that. So what might we take away from this today? The title for today's sermon is Fasting for a Time Like This. And I'd like to suggest three things to consider. The attraction of regular fasting as an exercise for our spiritual health. Then to suggest that we should be prepared and willing when the time comes and the call comes to enter into whole community day or a period of fasting and praying. And finally, for us to consider if I or we might be just the person to step out for a time like this. So let's look at these in a bit more detail. First, regular fasting. There's lots that can be said about this practicing fasting, but only a little time here. So perhaps a workshop or something like that might be helpful. Let us know. But maybe I've lost a number of you already, just switched off. Fasting? No, not for me. Many of us have been brought up on the need for 3 meals a day, and also that in Jesus we're free from any obligations about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And there's a lot of truth in that, but many times, we willingly give up something for somebody we love. And so it is with fasting. Today, I suspect most people in our communities who fast regularly do so for health benefits, such as the 5-2 diet by the late Michael Mosley, popularised by him. And we'll also notice our Muslim friends know a lot about this. Ramadan, the 40-day fast during the day, may well be derived from an ancient Syrian Christian Lent fast. It's also important, of course, not to do any fasting if you have health problems or eating disorders. You may also be aware that regular fasting is something which is finding a bit of a resurgence as a really beneficial Jesus follower practice, and particularly since Jesus himself assumed that his followers fasted. You might also be surprised that there's no command in the scriptures to regularly fast. So fasting is perhaps an opportunity for us to experience a gift of God's grace by giving of ourselves back to him. Well, a personal story. Apart from the odd medically required fast before general anaesthetic, and at that one time that Mike called the church to fast for a day, I had never fasted. In the men's book club earlier this year, we read the excellent Practicing the Way, exploring how we can see ourselves as learners, as apprentices of Jesus, in how to be with Jesus, to become like him, and to do as he did. And one of the things that he did was to regularly fast. The author says in this book, fasting is one of the most essential and powerful of all the practices of Jesus, and arguably the single most neglected in the modern Western church. So as we read this, to me, this sounded interesting and compelling and something to look at later. As a friend said to me recently, it's a way of distilling the voices within and placing yourself on the altar. It could also be a good way of helping to take our Jesus following out of a Sunday service and into the week as we fast for a day. So I left it to try later. Well, later, it turns out, was being asked to preach on this passage, where the main subject was fasting. And in all conscience, I could not do this without having practiced it myself. So a month ago, I looked up a really helpful short video on the Practicing the Way website and set a day, Fridays from rising to evening, no food until evening, just water. Well, approaching fasting, particularly voluntary fasting, seems to bring some surprises. Well, Jesus, I wrote in my not too often used journal, this is a day for you. And as the day went on, I consciously turned my occasional hunger pangs into prayers, such as thanks for God's love. And I had the sense that it was a bit like taking the effort to mark a special occasion, like putting on a suit, which I don't do very often, or special clothes to honour or appreciate someone. dressing up to go out with Jesus, that kind of thing. So Fridays were a day I didn't want to fritter any time away, but got on with plenty of normal activities and took time during the normal meal times to sit and reflect and read and pray. And the surprise was I looked forward to it the next week and the next and the next. A special marked day to draw close to God. And another surprise is that this new habit that's already affecting how I spend other days, more focus on God's presence, being more intentional. So books on fasting helpfully encourage that fasting should always center on God. Be God initiated. Calling you to do this. God ordained, like Anna in the temple who met Jesus. She worshipped and fasted all the time. So could this be a time to step into a regular fasting adventure? Maybe as part of your small group. Do you sense a tug just to try an experiment, something that can make us more alive to the Holy Spirit and his way of strengthening and guiding us? Secondly, communal fasting. In times of change and major challenge and danger, fasting as a community has been commanded. Clearly, it was in time like Esther's, but even to King George II in 1756, calling for a national fast in the threat of invasion from the French. In times like these, we could all number on at least two hands many pressing needs, both locally, nationally, and worldwide. I was struck by our city council leader, Alex Winning, writing after the Manchester synagogue attack recently. Southampton stands, he says, in solidarity with all those affected. In times like these, it's more important than ever that we come together in unity, reaffirming our shared values of peace, tolerance, and mutual respect. And in times like these, we have got questions about how we respond to those in need in our city. Questions about how we can welcome and nurture those seeking truth and direction in an ever-shifting media deluge. People who are hungry for something ancient and trustworthy. And many more questions and needs each one of us will know about. So it's good to be prepared to fast together when the call comes, and to welcome the opportunity to do so, I think. Finally, is it time to step out for a need? Our sermon series is called The God Who Gifts and Calls, and we can see that Esther was in the right place at the right time. God gifted her with her beauty and consequently her position in the nation. She sensed her need to move forward, that she was called to do so, but not knowing what the future would hold, not knowing where God's plan would end for her. Those long days of fast with her companions would have helped her to put her trust in God as she stepped out into the unknown. Is this a time when you're sensing that you are the right person for a need that you're aware of? A need in your family, a need in the community, a need within the church community that you're aware of and may be gifted for, maybe uniquely. Is it time to step out, not even knowing the full picture?